Hello and welcome to the Fantasy Life Show. Happy freaking Friday, everybody. I'm your host, Ian Hartitz. It is a great day to be great. It's a great day to break down a true national holiday, Week 18 football, baby. So we got injuries, we got rankings, we got all that and so much more to get ahead of. And by we, I mean myself and none other than Fantasy Life Director of Analytics, all-around baller, Dwain, The Rock McFarland. What's up, Dwain?
What's up? Yeah, week 18. It's the week where we will be monitoring our rankings, our projections, all the way down to like the last 90 minutes could be maybe the busiest 90 minutes, before kickoff on Sunday of my entire season because of all the players that will end up just being inactive, or we'll get late breaking news that they're only going to play a quarter. They're only going to play a drive. And then some of that news will be right. Some of that news will be wrong. It's always a lot of fun in the final week of the season.
A little bit of nightmare fuel on like Tuesday and Wednesday, Dwain, trying to figure out all the projections.
Oh, yeah. Well, honestly, I've learned over the last 3 years of the way to handle it. As I put out my first round, I will make any of the big adjustments, like things we've heard for sure, like Stafford not going to play. Okay, fine. Garoppolo. But anything that's a maybe, I'm just kind of leaving it alone right now. I depress the projections pretty much for everybody. You spread it out, except for the teams that we know are fighting for playoff spots. And then I make all the final tweaks really at the end. Today I'll make a big round. There'll be another round tomorrow, but there'll be a lot on Sunday morning. I've just kind of learned it's kind of a fool's errand to like go all in on it early in the week because you end up having to change stuff back the other way. So, I've learned a little bit. Try to learn, as you continue doing the job, Ian.
Nothing wrong with learning some new tricks, that is for sure. So anyway, we're going to try to do just that today. Again, going position by position, touching on some of the biggest injury and usually more importantly, coach speak notes that, again, hopefully indicate what is going to be going on this weekend. So Dwain, let's kick things off at quarterback with Mr. Anthony Richardson, seemingly not crawling around his house anymore, but also not yet healthy enough to be practicing while dealing with that back injury. So looks like we have another round of Joe Flacco under center for this, lost cause Colts season, but hey, maybe he can exist at least, well enough in those few seconds between getting the snap and getting the ball to guys like Josh Downs and Michael Pittman.
Yeah, Flacco actually makes an interesting DFS play. I don't know what his rostership or anything's going to look like, Ian, but I mean, last week he came out and threw for 330 yards and 2 touchdowns. His last start before that in week 10 threw for 272 and 2 touchdowns. You're going to have defensive injury issues that we'll have to be monitoring across teams. I haven't really honed in on the Jaguars to see how many players they might be missing, but it doesn't really matter because the Jaguars secondary has been terrible all season. It's been the best matchup for fantasy quarterbacks. And then we've got a passing attack that has 3 guys to pick from. I mean, last week, Michael Pittman Jr. came out here and really had his best game of the season, Ian. He gave you 25.9 fantasy points. We didn't talk about it because there were so many wide receivers that went bananas last week. 25.9 was only the 9th best wide receiver last weekend. Then you had Alec Pierce also was a player that was able to get up and scored big fantasy points last week. 24.2. Josh Downs was the odd man out. It was a game where they got ahead. They ran more 12, 13 personnel, that kind of thing. So it limited Josh Downs' route participation. But we know easily Downs could be the guy leading that trio. So I think those guys are all in play this weekend for those types of tournaments, or maybe you want to play over on Underdog and do a 1-week kind of contest. I think there's some things to like here about the Colts in this matchup. Flacco, obviously, another year to prove that the old man is, he's still got it, Ian. So he's playing for another backup job. And why not? He's done a good job the last 2 seasons.
You mentioned the big wide receiver score actually not being all that big relative to some of the other guys. And yeah, same thing with Flacco, man. You said it, 320 yards and 2 touchdowns, QB 14 on the week. So I know there were plenty of turnovers there, but man, what a truly wild fantasy, championship week that was. Hopefully you guys came out on the right side of it. Let's move on to the Miami Dolphins, still technically alive in the playoff race. However, Mike McDaniel has said the team is preparing as if former Pro Bowl QB Tyler Snoop Huntley will be under center. So Tua dealing with this hip injury, apparently re-aggravated it as he was out there against Houston. But hey, Dwain, at least for 1 week, the Snoop Huntley-led Dolphins looked a bit more competent than we saw earlier in the season.
Yeah, I mean, he threw for 225 yards, so that was nice. In some of his other starts this season, we had 96, 194, and 87. So it was a drastic improvement. It was a drastic improvement over that. So it is nice if you've got if you're wanting to use a player like Jonnu Smith, Tyreek Hill, still, like, I think I would lean more to an attack like the Colts. If I'm playing DFS, I just feel like there's more ceiling there with those guys. But any one of the Dolphins, right? I don't think you get multiple, but you could get one of the Dolphins end up having a good game with Huntley under center. You could at least feel you have a shot at that. Definitely wouldn't be trying to play multiple from the same team or anything like that. Obviously, Achane, he had kind of a rough week last week, so he's another guy that I would look for them to get re-involved in the offense. But, man, it just really stinks for the Dolphins. Like, their playoff chances are, not great, but they're still alive, and they don't have Tua on the field. That stinks, but at least Huntley was a little bit better, to your point, last week.
Does 2024 make you more confident or less about Achane moving forward? Because on the one hand, we saw just a not brand new portion of his game as a receiver. We knew he could catch passes, but man, did not exactly think he was going to be the most productive receiving back in the league. But on the other hand, some of that cheat code rushing efficiency that we thought was going to be more commonplace really fell off. So just quick early thoughts on Achane in 2025.
Yeah, I think it's pretty much neutral on him, because I don't think we can say that the efficiency is completely gone because we've done the offseason studies in the past on that and how fluky efficiency can be year over year. So I think the big play potential is probably not completely gone. I do think that teams have honed in on the Dolphins running game. And they've figured out what are the plays they like to use, what are the best things for Achane, and you've seen it on film, Ian. He's really the best when you get him out on those little toss plays and things like that. Let him very quickly see the blocking in front of him, as it develops. He's still behind the line of scrimmage. He finds the one spot and he just slams on the accelerator and he hits the big plays. Those things haven't been there as much. And also, I would just say teams have been less affected by their motion. It does feel like the NFL is adapting to all of this motion that we see from these offenses like Miami. Kyle Shanahan obviously using it for the San Francisco, Sean McVay in LA. It's still effective, but it doesn't seem to be taking the league by storm. I think defenses are starting to get their arms around a lot of this stuff, and that played a role in the run game for the Dolphins. All that misdirection, and you see the stuff Tua does. It's like a basketball player, like a point guard. You know how he disguises the handoff, and he'll just do the no look, toss around the back to the guy coming around on the end around. Really beautiful stuff, to be honest, from Tua. They're trying to find ways to still dress it up. But I do think part of this is the league catching on. Now, on the other side, to your point, they have shown that they're willing to really feed him. So I think that alone keeps him, in the right end of the conversation for running backs, because we know that efficiency could return with an offseason to kind of cook up some new ideas about how to better, get this guy into some spots where he can be successful.
270 touches and counting. I mean, if we knew that was going to be the number back
he can never do that, Ian. He doesn't weigh enough. He never could do that.
And the dude, he had a high ankle sprain in week 1. He got concussion.
Well, that's the other
5.
thing, dude. The high ankle sprain could still be a thing. Like, the high ankle sprain could still be a thing for Cooper Kupp. You guys have to, we hear from these players every offseason, there will be a handful of these high ankle sprains where the player will come out and literally tell you they were playing at like 70%. The whole season. Now, sometimes maybe that's the player saying that to mask. They didn't have the best second half of the season. We can't be for sure. But I remember the one with Jerry Jeudy a few years ago. And I mean, essentially, he was playing on half a leg. So I do think we have to pay attention to the high ankle sprains, and that could be a little bit of a factor too.
I'm going to start getting into some kind of exit interview team needs style offseason preview pieces next week. And, we've always done a good job, Dwain, at least in the last couple of years, of just making sure we get the injury timelines right for guys returning. But I'm also going to really try to dive through and make sure we highlight guys like Achane, who, maybe had an injury back in September that we didn't exactly, keep at the forefront of conversation throughout the rest of the year. Hopefully, again, just going to help make us that much better ahead of 2025. However, the Rams will not be that much better, at least in week 18 of 2025, because Jimmy Garoppolo has taken over in place of Matthew Stafford. Sean McVay resting his key starters with really nothing to play for. So going to be Jimmy G under center, Blake Corum at running back. Probably no Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp, Dwain. Not a given, but I would be surprised if they're playing.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is just a team you want to avoid. I think Blake Corum is really the only play you're going to have, maybe a Tutu Atwell. I will say Jimmy G, we know he's at least competent enough, Ian, to come out and run this style of offense. It is similar to what he ran with the 49ers. Now, they run more 3 wide receiver stuff versus, Kyle Shanahan likes to use the fullback, use the tight end, but still, Lots of motion, lots of subterfuge, misdirection, disguise stuff, trying to catch the defense off balance. And I wouldn't be surprised if they put together a decent game plan for Jimmy G just to make sure he's ready. Because if something were to happen to Stafford in the playoffs, you got to be able to have a backup that's ready to roll. So it will be with a bunch of backups, though. So it's hard to get. We're not that excited about Jimmy G, but he might be enough that we can still feel okay about Blake Corum. McVay has hinted towards, saying he's excited. He's excited about seeing a heavy workload for Blake Corum. The one thing we have to remember, Ian, we talk about this all the time. What does heavy workload mean? It is all it's very coach specific. To one coach, that might mean, yeah, we want to get him 12 touches. To another means, oh, yeah, we're really going to load him up and give him everything. So it's hard to know for sure what that means. But I think we're probably looking at least 15 touches for Corum, but it could be like 25. Like I think it's 15 to 25 opportunities between targets and rushing attempts. So he would be the one name I would be the most interested in on the Rams this weekend.
Rams are the same team that told us Corum was drafted to basically be a one-for-one complement to Kyren Williams, and he basically didn't play for the first 2 months of the season. So obviously Kyren doing his own thing, not saying he should have been taken off the field any more than he was, but yeah, always tough to tell exactly what is going on over there in Los Angeles. So last situation we want to talk about at quarterback, though, Dwain, get those Browns jerseys out with all the quarterbacks and update them, because we have the 40th starting QB since 1999. Bailey Zappi is going to be under center. I kid you not, Dwain. They keep doing it. They keep finding some of the very few quarterbacks who statistically have been worse than Deshaun Watson. We've already, hated on Dorian Thompson-Robinson enough. But again, pull up the EPA per dropback numbers. I believe Bailey Zappi is literally dead last over these past 2 seasons. Probably most known for just looking very similar to Mac Jones. Where are they finding these guys, Dwain?
I don't know. Bill Belichick found this one, so I'm not quite sure. It's not a situation that we want to be anywhere near in fantasy, even if you're trying to be the most contrarian of all contrarians. Like there is nothing that we want. We don't want anything to do with this. Bailey Zappi, Dorian Thompson-Robinson, and it sounds like they're going to both play, Ian. That's the other thing. Like we're just going to see both of these guys, but Bailey Zappi will get the start here. So yeah, the Browns are just trying to, this is a nice way of saying we don't want to win. We just want to get a better draft pick. And you know what? I respect that. I feel that. If I was a Browns fan, this is what I would want from my team.
62 qualified quarterbacks over these past 2 seasons. Watson is 55th in EPA per dropback, and then 61st DTR and dead last Bailey Zappi at 62nd. You cannot make this up. So again,
great scouting department is what you're saying.
Oh my God. Yeah. All right. Moving on to something slightly, less depressing is the Patriots seemingly playing Drake May. He does have a right hand injury. People are wondering if they were maybe just going to try to tank this one. However, OC Alex Van Pelt did already say that May will start the game for sure. So it looks like May is going to be going up against mostly Mitchell Trubisky and the Bills here on Sunday. Also note the Eagles are still having Jalen Hurts in the concussion protocol, but also Kenny Pickett not practicing with that rib injury. So it looks like more Tanner McKee could be on the horizon with, again, a bunch of backups largely in Philly. 49ers quarterback Brock Purdy dealing with that right elbow injury. That's right. That means it's the Pastronaut again. Joshua Dobbs expecting to be under center for the 49ers. Also note Derek Carr continues to be sidelined with that left hand injury. And also Mike McCarthy would not say who the starting QB will be. I feel like they're doing Cooper Rush a little bit dirty here, Dwain, because he is at 52.3% snaps. He would get an extra $250,000 if he gets up to 55% on the season. So, really does seem like money could be the primary culprit there. Or maybe we'll just, actually get to see Trey Lance play a football game for once. What a novel concept that would be. So that was the quarterback. Key news and notes, guys. Plenty of good stuff on the way, though, with running back right after a quick word to our friends over at Game Time. Dwain, we both know there is nothing like being at a game in person, especially around the holidays, and Game Time accordingly is my go-to for finding tickets, not just for sports though, also for concerts and shows too. Now that football is going to be winding down, I do have to start listening to Mrs. Hartitz a bit more when she says things like, oh, let's not watch football for 8 straight hours every single Saturday and Sunday. Maybe got to go see some music too. And again, Game Time going to be our primary means of accomplishing that task. I was actually scrolling through the Game Time app the other day, and I came across my new favorite feature called Game Time Picks. And let me tell you what, it is a total game changer. Game Time Picks curates your experience, showing you the best deals on great seats, and Game Time app makes it so easy that it's truly a no-brainer, people. Seriously, Game Time takes all the guesswork out of buying tickets, and you can find out for yourself by downloading the Game Time app, creating an account, using code LIFE for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply, but again, create an account and redeem code LIFE, L-I-F-E, for $20 off. Download Game Time today, because what time is it? Game time. Game time. Let's go, Dwain. I'm ready. And you know who is also ready? Maybe Chase Brown. He is a game time decision per head coach Zach Taylor. Did not practice all week. When asked about, his starting running back, Zach Taylor gave us a ton of great information and said, we'll see. So we will see, Dwain. And if we will see Chase Brown on the bench, going to be the Khalil Herbert show most likely in Cincinnati.
Yeah, I don't think Chase Brown's playing. As a rule, the way I treat players that are DNPs all week and then labeled, as game time decisions, I leave them as a player that's not going to be in the lineup. Now, we'll switch it on. Good news is it's Saturday, so you'll know. I don't know why I'm saying good news. Hopefully none of you guys have championship weekend this weekend. What a brutal way to finish a fantasy season and try to win a championship with all these players potentially not playing. But I do think it's going to be Khalil Herbert, to your point, Ian. We could see a little bit of Travion Williams on passing downs. Wasn't the case over the last 4 drives of the game last week, whenever they actually did pass quite a bit. So I think Khalil Herbert looks like a guy that's probably going to get 60 to 70% of the snaps. Could even be more, honestly. He could be like at 85%, but reasonably projecting him, in that 60 to 70% range, with Travion getting a little bit of the passing down work. Not the easiest matchup on the ground for the Bengals against the Steelers. But Khalil Herbert, has shown to be a playmaker in the past. We love the Bengals offense. So there is there's still an opportunity for this guy to get 20 opportunities and come through with a score, Ian. So yeah, Khalil Herbert is a guy that has to be inside, probably the top 18 running backs this weekend if we don't have Chase Brown.
Tough matchup, but Bengals are still implied to score 25 points. Only the Broncos, Packers, Vikings, Falcons, Bucks, Lions, and Ravens have more. So, yeah, I know I listed a few teams there, but also saw the Browns sitting at a 10.75 point implied team total. Dwain cannot, not to continue bashing the Browns in every single segment, but yeah,
that's got to be a low for the season. I don't remember an 11.
Yeah, I think Schefter tweeted,
yeah, that's got to be.
Dude, that line's up to 20 points. I think Schefter said recently that's the biggest underdog that the Browns have been ever, pretty much in their history. So, yeah. God, Cleveland, what are you doing? But anyway, yeah, back to Cincinnati and Chase Brown. Should be more Khalil Herbert than not. Even if we do see Brown out there, man, I would be surprised if he is getting his usual full-time workload. So, God forbid you are in one of those Week 18 championships. Going to be really tough to trust there. And speaking of that, Dwain, what possesses these people to do this in Week 18? It's not like it's default. It's not like you accidentally forgot to change a setting and now you have a Week 18 championship. You have to intentionally go into your league settings and make it Week 18. What is wrong with these monsters?
I've heard. I've actually heard some discourse on this, and there were some leagues that did this because of how many teams that were on bye in week 14, and they didn't want to deal with buys in the way they were handling their playoff schedule. Still, though, I would rather plan around those buys. It sucks. Come on, NFL. We don't have to have all those buys right there. Realize how much fantasy drives people to watch your games, even when they suck. This is how you get these island games that are terrible, and people are still tuning in because they care about their fantasy teams, not the stupid teams that suck. So whenever you look at it, I get it. It feels like you got to try to do something for the bye weeks, but man, I would much rather plan around the buys than deal with the unknown of what's going to happen in week 18, because you just you have no control over it, Ian, over which teams will have clinched, which teams haven't clinched, and just how many players start getting shut down for a hangnail, the smallest injuries. And I get why teams do it. Why come out and risk a player essentially in what they're thinking is a preseason game? And go ahead and give the other young players on your roster bubble that you got to make decisions on in the offseason. You're giving them some playing time. So I understand why teams do it and why they handle it the way they do in week 17, week 18, week 18 now, but week 17, for, technically games played. But yeah, I would avoid this. Yeah. I think I would just rather deal with planning around the bye weeks.
Better explanation than I've heard so far, but still, let's do week 17. I know the week 14 buys are really annoying, Dwain, in some of our real-time sports.
There's so many of them.
time. Well, yeah, but also, I mean, we had the situation where the playoffs were actually weeks 12 through 14. So, man, just really tough trying to handle some of that. Our de facto championship, 6 teams on bye. Hate seeing that. But enough about us. Let's get back to some running backs, specifically good news surrounding Austin Eckler. He is eligible now to return from IR with that concussion, and he's been practicing in full all week, Dwayne. So, Brian Robinson, he's had a great role. Unfortunately, couldn't make all that much of it here over the past 3 or 4 games. Now with Eckler returning, going to be tough to get behind either guy too much because, hey man, I don't know, Jerry McNichols, Chris Rodriguez, it really has been a productive yet free-flowing running back rotation in Washington really all year long.
Yeah, I think it really condenses back down to more of a two-way backfield at this point. I mean, we'll see. One of the other guys could stay involved, but obviously Austin Eckler was handling most of the passing down duties early in the season. I think he quickly, reacclimates and takes over that workload. He's coming off a concussion, so we would guess that he's going to be conditioned and ready to play in the game. We don't typically see players returning from concussions suffer any sort of issue as far as their playing time, like a soft tissue injury, things like that, where they're having to maybe more slowly ramp back up. So I think he steps right back into that passing down role, Ian. If you look at him 2 games before he was lost or 1 game before he was lost to concussion, man, he had 89 yards receiving in that game against the Eagles. So the other thing I'll say, and you mentioned it, Brian Robinson Jr. has not looked good. Like, he has not played well. He might be another guy that's really still playing with. He's had multiple injuries this year, just might not be healthy, has not been able to make the most of the opportunities. I think there's a sneaky opportunity here for the Commanders in the playoffs that maybe Eckler really becomes more the featured guy, just given how bad Brian Robinson Jr. has looked over like the last 5 to 6 weeks of play.
And Eckler, to his credit, before he got injured, man, looked great. He was yet another one of these veteran running backs where, again, if you look at the 2023 numbers, they were bad. But again, considering he was playing through that ankle, considering that Chargers offense wasn't really doing him any favors, another situation where, again, maybe we looked a bit too hard at some of those RB advanced stats. So 4.8 yards per carry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. I was going to say and Jaden Daniels, despite being a scrambler, he'll throw it to the guy. Like 52, 47, 22, 30, 47 receiving yards in those first 5 weeks to start the season. Then he had a little bit of a bump, 3-6, but then came back with a 41. We already talked about the 89. In the other game, he was hurt. So, I mean, he's been an active part of the passing game. And again, remember, it's Terry McLaurin and then kind of a bunch of guys. No disrespect to Zach Ertz. He is the second guy on the team. But, I mean, there's room here for, Eckler to potentially be like the number 2 target on the team in some of these games.
10.5 yards per catch for Eckler this season. That's his highest mark since 2019, 4.8 yards per carry, highest mark since 2018. So I know earlier this year, I just did one of those charts where it's like just simple yards per carry, yards per reception, on the X and Y axis, and really is up there in the right quadrant with guys like Jahmyr Gibbs. So efficient year for Eckler. Hopefully, again, that just leads to more money for, again, a true fantasy first ballot Hall of Famer, I'm sure, when that time comes. Talk about another running back situation. Covered it yesterday in the incentives, so don't need to go too long here, Dwayne, but Tony Pollard is practicing through that ankle injury. Meanwhile, Tajay Spears has not practiced all week. So remember, Pollard really has not been a mainstay on the practice field largely all season long with one, lower body injury after another. It was actually an illness last Saturday that kept him out of the picture. So Pollard has a lot to play for. I know the Titans don't, but that's been the case for a while, Dwayne. I mean, if you did have to kind of go through, try to find some of these cash game staples, again, I'm not trying to say I'm, the cash game king like Peter Over said or anything like that, Dwayne, but I do think with Pollard here, a lot to play for. It's in an offense where we've seen them heavily feature him without Spears. I think Pollard's going to touch the ball 20 plus times this weekend.
Yeah, I think so as well. I mean, the coaches could always just decide, look, he's banged up. Why risk it? We don't have anything to play for here. Pollard's under contract again next year. So there's still a chance, right, that line of thinking takes over. If I were the coaching staff, I would be considering that. But to your point, you got the incentives. And when you have the incentives there for the player, it kind of looks like it's not a good look for the franchise, right? The coaching staff, the front office, if it looks like they're holding them back from hitting an incentive. So I think he'll at least have a chance to hit the yardage prop like what we talked about yesterday. Hit the yardage prop, get the yards he needs to get his incentive. Maybe score 1 rushing touchdown. I believe, if I remember correctly, he needs 2 rushing touchdowns to reach that next level. So if they do go all in on it, I mean, there is an opportunity here to try to get him those 2 touchdowns if the Titans offense can cooperate and get him into a position where they have the opportunity to let him go after that.
Facing the same Texans defense, he ripped apart, for 129 total yards and a touchdown against just a short, few weeks ago. We'll see if he gets the opportunities to do so again this Sunday. Now down to New Orleans, we do have Alvin Kamara and unfortunately Kendre Miller not practicing, which might just pave the way, Dwain, for a featured role for none other than Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Not Jamal Williams, can never give the ball to Jamal Williams, but apparently it is CEH time in New Orleans.
Yeah, last week, Edwards-Helaire had 47% of the snaps, 38% of the rushing attempts, 43% route participation. Was pretty active, too, in the passing game. 22% targets per route run, leading to a 12% target share. So, it's still split, but you take Kendre Miller out of the picture, and a lot of that work for Clyde Edwards-Helaire came early in the game. Now remember, this was a game where the game script was kind of weird. The Saints were actually leading. So we actually did see Jamal Williams get some work later in the game. He had 40% of the snaps. So I think you get a split between those two guys. Could see Jordan Mims active as well. He wasn't available last week because they lost Kendre Miller. So Jordan Mims is a guy that's handled some passing down work. So tough to get overly excited about Edwards-Helaire. Like, I'd feel a lot better, if I'm the cash game, I don't know, I'm not the king. We'll go, what am I, like the Joker? The cash game Joker. Like, I would feel better, about players like Michael Carter. I would definitely feel better about Tony Pollard, guys like that over Clyde Edwards-Helaire and some of these back for the Saints. I think there's still going to be a rotation, but it is interesting to see CEH and look, getting to do it, for a team from Louisiana. He played for LSU. He got to play down there with Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson. So maybe it was just that, Ian. Defense is so worried about those two wide receivers. It was pretty easy for Clyde Edwards-Helaire to slip out of the backfield down there in LSU and get all those yards that got us so excited whenever he went to the Chiefs. But I see more of a split backfield here.
Yeah, we really don't give enough credit to Chase, Jefferson, and Burrow, obviously themselves, but then making all that money for CEH. And also Terrace Marshall, Dwain, he had the world fooled as well coming out of the Tigers. So, yes, it does kill me, again, still that Jamal Williams 3-year, $12 million deal and hasn't been able to sniff a role in New Orleans. Looking at his game log right now, he had 11 and 8 carries in the first 2 blowouts of the season for the Saints, has not had more than 3 carries in a single game since. So 2 years with the Saints, just 2 touchdowns. I will always appreciate that first one, though, courtesy of the fake kneel down by our true king, Jameis Winston. So good stuff there. However, maybe not such good stuff here for Josh Jacobs, fantasy managers. Again, if you are sick enough to still be doing this thing in week 18, he did hint at a limited role in week 18. So Jacobs' specific quote was, just being honest, being realistic. I don't see me taking that many carries in this game. Obviously, I want to play. I'm going to push the play, and I'm playing, but I don't see myself taking 30 carries. So, certainly a reasonable proposition, Dwain. I do think we would agree with him. He is limited on the injury report with a wrist injury. So assuming Jacobs isn't going to be full go, seems like it could be Emmanuel Wilson time. Chris Brooks dealing with an ankle injury as well.
Yeah, Emmanuel Wilson, like if we don't have Chris Brooks and we've got Josh Jacobs potentially leaving the game early, like there's some potential appeal here. But Josh Jacobs also didn't come out and simply say that I'm just not going to have a role this weekend. Like he could still play the whole game and they just dial him back a little bit. We don't know for sure what that quote means. If you look at the Packers, yes, they've already clinched a playoff seed, but there is some seeding still in play. So depending on how the coaching staff feels about their matchups and how things are unfolding over the course of the weekend, like that could really determine like how they want to handle this in the game. I think there's also a slight chance that it's only a small downgrade for Josh Jacobs. I think we've got to downgrade and we can't have as much confidence, in him as we've had in the previous weeks. But what if it just means, taking away 5 opportunities, not taking away 10 or 15? Because ultimately that's what you need to have Emmanuel Wilson really provide much value. So like Emmanuel Wilson, dart throw, but really only if we don't have Chris Brooks. If Chris Brooks is also up, that also means he's going to get the passing down work. That's at least what we've seen over the last 4 to 6 games. Chris Brooks getting more of the passing down work, Emmanuel Wilson getting some of the early down work.
Obviously, Marshawn Lloyd out of the picture, but I do wonder, Dwain, they drafted that dude day 2 for a reason. And I know Josh Jacobs has been fantastic. If you draft him this year, you're a very happy fantasy manager and everything. But do you really think force feeding Jacobs the way they have was the plan? Or do you think maybe in 2025, we see Lloyd get a bit more run? Because again, I'm sure they wanted to give Jacobs the ball plenty, but we saw it with Aaron Jones over the years. LaFleur historically was a bit more of a committee guy.
Yeah, he has been a committee guy, but I think I think it would just take one of these other guys like really playing well. The thing is, like, Emmanuel Wilson and Chris Brooks actually have played pretty well. They just don't have the draft capital, invested in them. So they've had small roles, on the team throughout the season. I think we'll just have to wait and see how it plays out. What does training camp look like next year for Lloyd? If he's looking really electric and the vibes are really high, then yeah, I think we'll have to think about taking Josh Jacobs down a little bit. But if we continue to see the same thing where Lloyd can't stay healthy and there's not really anybody to challenge, man, Josh Jacobs plays in a great offense, and he is a back. Like, if there's not a lot of things we can say about Josh Jacobs, I'm not trying to bash on him, but he's not like this electric running back, but we know he can handle a workload. The guy's shown multiple times that he can come out here and handle really all facets of the game. And he can, and he can still have those games where you watch him, you're like, wow, he looks really great as a runner. But I would put him more in the above average running back class. Like, I'm not putting him up there in that, wow, this guy's just electric every time he touches the ball. But I do think being able to handle a workload based on the research that I've now done it's a skill. And coaches look at it that way as well. Do they have someone they know they can trust on all the downs and someone that can physically stand up to that sort of punishment? And I think Josh Jacobs has shown us that he can do that.
330 touches this year. As long as he doesn't get to 375, we're good, Dwayne. Have you seen those offseason studies before?
Oh, yeah.
I think that's my least favorite part of every
363, I think. Yeah, now, and they had to up it because like some outlier beat it. It's so silly.
Can't include playoff stats, right? That would just make too much sense.
No, you can't do that.
Only regular season, because then that would have guys like Derrick Henry in there.
Yeah, carries and stuff in the playoffs don't really count because you don't get hit. Nothing. You don't take on punishment or anything on those. Yeah.
As always, never let the truth get in the way of a good NFL stat. So make sure you tune into all of that in this offseason. So some more running back notes before we move on to wide receivers. Guys mentioned Eckler practicing in full. Same goes for Will Shipley. So it seems like he is nearing a return from the concussion protocol. We talked a bit about Kenneth Gainwell yesterday, and if he could be having a featured role, if Shipley is going to be out there, will be lesser chances for, again, Gainwell to completely take over the Saquon Barkley-less backfield. Broncos could be getting Tyler Beatty back as well. Had a nice stretch earlier in the season, albeit he was also practicing in full last week, so I'm not sure if that necessarily means anything ahead of Sunday. Aaron Jones limited in practice with a quad injury. Wasn't listed last week, however, he has been playing through, just various kind of lower body ailments throughout this year. Not overly worried about his status for, again, that Sunday night banger against the Lions. Also know Bucky Irving dealing with shoulder and shin injuries. He's had weeks this year where he wasn't practicing at all, so the fact he is out there in a limited fashion doesn't have me too worried, but again, it wasn't an issue as recently as last week. Also know we could see Miles Sanders return. He was limited on a Thursday. He was full on Wednesday, so it's not ideal to see these guys going backwards. However, was also the case for Xavier Legette, so maybe just, some maintenance work being done by the Carolina Panthers. Guys not practicing and accordingly not expecting to play. David Montgomery with a knee. Also, James Conner and Trey Benson both moved to IR. By the way, NFL injury reports, can you please just put your IR players on the injury report? It's so annoying. They get taken off. And if you're not, again, being very careful, you can't miss it. But we did not miss this one. Conner and Benson out of the picture. So get ready for a lot of Michael Carter here for the Cardinals. Also, note Gus Edwards still not practicing. So J.K. Dobbins could have every chance to meet some of his incentives. Also know Amir Abdullah, who quietly was one of the MVPs of the fantasy playoffs. He is dealing with a foot injury and not out there, so maybe more Alexander Mattison. Dylan Lobb would also be a candidate to get more touches. Browns running back Jerome Ford is out for Saturday. So is Pierre Strong Jr. So again, if you're just trying to get 20 potentially ugly touches from Deontay Foreman for a Browns team barely implied to score a touchdown, that's there for you. But I'm not going to go too much deeper into our Browns hatred. I think we've already covered those bases. Also know Isaiah Pacheco dealing with a rib injury. He wasn't really expecting to play anyway. And also Justice Hill is once again out for Saturday. A bit more Keaton Mitchell perhaps alongside Derrick Henry as always. So that was our running back news, guys. But now a quick word from our friends over at Bud Light.
Even if you score, always stay hungry. No matter how hard you football, it's easy to Sunday.
Lions might want some kneecaps being bit, but not Tee Higgins, Dwain, because he is dealing with ankle and knee injuries. And he caught on. Shout out Andrew Cooper, really fun follow. But he was the original guy who put together the breakdown of Tee Higgins running up the hill and what that meant for his status. T told us, man, he has caught on to our shenanigans, and there is no hill running this week. So we really are going in blind at this point. There's no way analytically to know if he is going to play. Officially questionable for Saturday. All, Drake and joshing aside, though, Dwain, he was limited throughout this week. T always seems to be banged up with one issue or another. I'd be very surprised if he is not out there for this must-win matchup here against the Steelers.
Yeah, this just feels like maintenance, limited each day. We're at the end of the season. Everybody's dealing with injuries. Let's just try to get him, get him the reps we need to make sure we're crisp for the game, but have him healthy for the contest. So I'm really not worried about Tee Higgins. I mean, the dude's averaging 19.5 fantasy points per game, Ian. So that's number 3 in the NFL. Number 1's Jamar Chase. If we put a minimum of 8 games, he's number 2. But Chris Godwin sneaking in there. He had 7 games with 19.7 fantasy points per game. Jamar Chase, Chris Godwin, Tee Higgins, Justin Jefferson, and Amon-Ra St. Brown. Those are your top 5 wide receivers in fantasy this year. So, yeah, Tee Higgins, absolutely elated to have him playing in a game that matters for the Bengals against the Steelers. So, this is a game that I'm really excited about watching.
Tee Higgins, man, if he does get that cheddar to go ahead and stay here in Cincinnati, I mean, going to have to be top 12, top 13 in the ranks, Dwayne. Again, it's just one of these situations where the passing game is so explosive and productive and so consolidated around these guys. I do worry about just, again, the injuries. This guy has had a hamstring issue every single year since 2019, but man, these numbers when he's on the field, you can't ignore them.
Yeah, I think he's going to be a round 2 pick next season, and maybe even regardless of where he lands because he was so good this year. But whenever you look at Tee Higgins, the other thing that's really working in the favor of him and Jamar Chase and Joe Burrow is how terrible the defense has been. Historically, when we look at the Bengals defense, it's been pretty decent. And so that's been able to keep game scripts in check. The offense was always really good because of Burrow and the weapons, but now we have nothing to hold the other team in check. And that is leading to these massive game. So we know that the Bengals are going to do everything they can to try to correct that because they have Joe Burrow. You want to go try to win. You want to go try to win, Super Bowls whenever you've got a player that's that good at that position with these weapons around him. So I think a lot of how we're going to feel about these guys will come down to what do we think about the Bengals defensive moves this offseason. Obviously, they could add everybody they want and we're not going to make a huge move, but I think it does determine, like, is it a guy you want to have in the top 12 or somebody that maybe you look at more as like wide receiver 16, 17, something along those lines. But yeah, not to take anything away from T, absolute balling out this season, looks amazing.
I do kind of worry about how this archetype tends to age. I mean, okay, guys like Brandon Marshall kept on keeping on, deep into their careers, but the Dez Bryants, the Kenny Gallaudays, guys who were able to make those 50-50 contested catches into 70-30 propositions in their favor. I do just wonder, again, the overwhelming physical tools like T, you lose a step, it could be more problematic than other players. But that said, the dude doesn't turn 26 still for a few weeks, so would not be expecting, an imminent drop-off by any stretch of the imagination. However, Dwayne, we do have another wide receiver potentially returning to the field. Chris Olave practicing in full this week while working his way back from yet another concussion. Why? Just chill. Please, Chris, just chill.
I bet he doesn't play still. I'm guessing that the guy doesn't play. I know he's getting to practice in full, and which is good. We're glad to see that he's back and he's healthy enough to be on the football field. But just to your point, no reason to really play Chris Olave. And if they do play him, Ian, we're still dealing with Spencer Rattler. So like, what's the ceiling really for a guy like Olave? He's a guy that we like. He's another one. Thinking ahead to next year, like, where are we really going to rank this player? He's a guy that's always had the underlying data points, right? The yards per route run, the target shares, air yard shares, all those things have always been there for Olave. And historically, guys that do that stuff do eventually come through and have big fantasy seasons, but there are also outliers that don't. And Chris Olave is kind of starting to fall into that bucket, of, okay, like, is he really just a wide receiver 2? And that's what it is. Now, having said that, that's the bucket Tee Higgins had found his way into after people thought, oh, man, this guy's going to eventually be a wide receiver 1. Then it didn't happen. It's like, okay, maybe he is just a wide receiver 2 or 3. And then this year he goes nuts. So it's tough to say, with these guys, but I do hope they just let Olave, to your point, rest. And we'll talk about in the offseason whether we should rank him as a wide receiver 2 or wide receiver 3.
I do think at this point it'd make more sense if he was paid more like the Jalen Waddles, Devonta Smiths of the world. Very good wide receivers in their own right. But hey, with New Orleans, obviously, I hope finally entering a true rebuild. You never know with their front office and all the void years they're going to tack on the contracts to try to keep things alive. But hey, if it is a situation where they're not looking to overly extend Olave, maybe he could be one of these March trade candidates to a team like the Patriots, who again are just trying to get some semblance of good wide receivers out there for their young quarterback. So I'm with you. Even if Olave is out there, tough to trust him at all because, yeah, Spencer Rattler, in the spirit of continuing to just crap on Browns quarterbacks, is right there in the group with Zappy and DTR. Only those two and Trevor Siemian have actually been worse in EPA per dropback over these past 2 seasons. So Rattler, he's flashed a little bit. He does have, a howitzer for a right arm and everything. Hasn't been surrounded by all these great wide receivers. MVS has been his number one for most of this year, but yeah, certainly not exactly a great first year for the rookie. However, Dwain, we do have another chance for Diontae Johnson to prove that we do, in fact, know ball. He will be making his debut in Houston here this weekend. So, hey, Stephon Diggs was a little bit disgruntled in Buffalo. He seemed to be having a good time in Houston. Now we'll see if D'Amico Ryans can, again, put his best, Mike Tomlin, hat on and continue to be a safe haven for pissed off alpha wide receivers. So, thoughts on Diontae Johnson and the role he could find early on with CJ Stroud and company?
It's just really hard to know, to be honest. Anyone that thinks they know, they just don't. He could have a 20% route participation. He could have an 80% route participation. We just have no clue what the coaches, what their goals are and how far along, Diontae Johnson is with this. One thing we know about Diontae Johnson is that he is a strong target earner. If we narrow down to players with at least 150 routes this season, Ian, 27% targets per route run, that ranks 7th in the NFL. So the guy's a baller. He can play. Obviously, there are locker room issues with this man. We can't deny that. Maybe he's a cancer. I don't know. I don't know him personally, so I'm not going to go out of my way. We don't know all the circumstances. What we do know is we have repeated behavior now where he's being, moved on from multiple teams. So something going on there, but we do know that he can play. Just hard to say what it's going to be. The moment he gets to an 80-90% route participation, though, he's going to score fantasy points. They're just going to come. So it's just a matter of when does that happen, or does it happen? It might not happen. They might just keep him in he might be their wide receiver 4. That might be the way they view him. He might just not be up to speed yet, even in the playoffs, enough to be able to get on the field enough to really make noise in fantasy.
I'm not off the bandwagon just yet. Might be holding on with one arm at this point, not going to lie. But again, still do maintain there's a good football player in there somewhere. We'll say, though, man, the open score, shout out ESPN Advanced Analytics, very cool, very free, stats you guys can check out for yourself. Had Diontae Johnson as the premier separator in the NFL over these past 4 or 5 seasons, just tied for 38th this year. So not saying it's the end all be all. He is tied with Garrett Wilson and DJ Moore in that very stat. I don't think they suddenly suck either at this point. But again, we do want to hype him up with that stat. Thought it was worth mentioning again when he's not performing quite as well this year. So those were the big wide receivers news and notes. However, I do have a handful of other things I wanted to touch on, starting with Amari Cooper added to the injury report with a back issue on Thursday. So obviously had a hard enough time just finding a full-time role in this crowded Bills passing game. Now with the back issue, certainly not going to help matters. Mentioned Chris Olave already, but Marquez Valdes-Scantling should be again having a chance to be on the field. He practiced in full on Thursday after being limited on Wednesday. Also note Lab McConkey dealing with a toe issue. Started off the week with the DMP, was limited though on Thursday, and he's been dealing with various issues. So no, this was not a specific thing last week, but been playing through the pain. Expect him to do so again this weekend. A bit more questionable though for Josh Palmer. He is dealing with a foot injury and has not practiced yet this week. So maybe going to be more Lab McConkey, Quentin Johnson, and DJ Chark out there for Justin Herbert. Malik Neighbors in Malik Neighbors fashion was not listed on the injury report on Wednesday. However, got added as a limited participant on Thursday with a toe issue. So we'll see what happens if the Giants suddenly want to go back and try to start tanking again. But yeah, I would expect Neighbors to play through this as he has with most of his issues largely all season long. Meanwhile, Jalen Waddle limited with a knee issue, was questionable and didn't play last week after also being limited though. So we'll see if we can get a full session in on Friday ahead of this weekend. Drake London, Darnell Mooney, and Kadero Hodge. Apparently, Dwayne, the Falcons had a fight Thursday because none of these guys were listed on the injury report on Wednesday. They were all limited on Thursday. So it wasn't rest. They had knee, shoulder, and rib issues respectively. So I would hope that, again, this was more maintenance for the entire wide receiver room, and they just didn't really list it as that way, but certainly something to keep an eye on either way. Also, Diami Brown could be getting back on the field, which would be great for Elidime Zaccheaus. Sterling Shepard also could be back to help, eat into a little bit of Jalen McMillan's target share. Xavier Leggett, Jordan Whittington, Tutu Atwell, Mecole Hardman, more guys that are limited. Now, I do have a handful of big names not practicing for various reasons. Deebo Samuel and Ricky Pearsall, neither was listed last week, and accordingly, both should be considered actual threats to not be out there. Pearsall actually was limited, so more of an issue for Deebo, there. Eagles wide receivers A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith both resting and not practicing, so seemingly will be included with the starters who are not going to be playing this weekend. Also, Roma Dunze dealing with an illness could be out of the picture. Christian Watson still dealing with the knee issue. Tyler Boyd, Jalen Polk, and Roman Wilson, all guys that, again, seem to be on the wrong side of questionable. So not great there, but we do still have some great stuff on the way. Tight ends and bold predictions. Stick around, guys, but first, a quick word to our friends over at DraftKings. Grab your favorite team's jersey and some snacks and head to the couch for another Sunday of action-packed football. And you can get even closer to the action with my partners at DraftKings, because right now, all new DraftKings customers who bet just $5 will get $150 in bonus bets if your bet wins. Just download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and sign up using the promo code FANTASYLIFE. The crown is yours. That's right, new customers get $150 in bonus bets if your bet wins after betting just $5. If sports betting is not yet available in your state, don't worry. You can still join in on all the fun with DraftKings Daily Fantasy and have the shot to win cash prizes. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now. New customers use the promo code FANTASYLIFE and bet just $5 on any wager to get $150 in bonus bets if your bet wins. That's promo code FANTASYLIFE only at DraftKings Sportsbook. All right, Dwayne, not too much to talk about at tight end. However, one of the stars of the fantasy playoffs, Chigoziem Okonkwo, has been added to the injury report with a limited practice, dealing with an abdomen injury. So the limited part could be a bit deceiving. When we don't see a guy listed on Wednesday and then they're added on Thursday, it does imply that the injury happened at practice. So the Friday participation will tell us a lot. I'm just excited to see maybe if Chig can keep things going here in basically 2025, because again, we saw the flashes his rookie year. He showed us again this year. Starting to think this is just a really good football player, Dwayne.
Yeah, they need to feature this guy next year. They got to figure out a way to get him on the field more. That's up to the coaches. He might not be the best blocker. He's a guy that they like to move around the formation, do some different things with. You can get him the ball at the line of scrimmage. You can get him the ball on like these little drag routes, crossers, things like that. Let him just use that athleticism that he has. But you mentioned it, Ian, over these last 3 games, 28%, 31%, and 23% target shares. Utilization score over the last 4 games setting at a 7.0. So, yeah, he's made drastic improvements. And every time we've seen this guy get playing time, like he has actually come through in fantasy. The issue has always been not getting on the field for enough snaps. So I don't understand it, man. Like, do we really have to get Josh Wiley and Nick Van Ette? Sorry, Ian, not trying to, shoot strays at any sort of Ohio State player here. David Martin Robinson and Thomas Odukoya. Yeah, exactly. Do these guys really need to be on the field at all? No, I mean, fine, have a 3-way rotation. But let's just get it down to 2 and let Chig play 70% of the snaps. Figure out a way to do that. I promise you, the defensive coordinator on the other side of the field, is more worried about having to deal with Chig Okonkwo in the passing game than probably anybody besides Calvin Ridley. So I just think he's a guy that you got to figure out a way to use more next season. Hopefully he gets to finish out the season strong and doesn't miss week 18.
One of the rare tight ends where you can design screens, even the random rush attempt or two, and actually expect him to make some big things happen. Has that Jonnu Smith quality to his game. Not trying to just be a Jersey scout. I understand Jonnu was doing that in Tennessee as well, but really it would be nice to see Chig get more yak chances, because that really is where he is best. So not your exactly, Zach Ertz going to sit in zone coverage type, but yeah, get the man running downfield. More good things than bad have happened really throughout his entire career. So hopefully Titans are getting Chiggy with it more often here in 2025 and beyond. But otherwise, guys, some more tight end notes just to be aware of. Most notably, Dallas Goedert potentially returning this week, coming back from IR and that knee issue. He has been practicing in full, so hasn't played since week 13. Maybe they just rest him, but presumably on track to return for the playoffs. Nice boost for that Eagles offense. Also note George Kittle dealing with ankle and hamstring injuries. He did get up to a limited practice on Thursday. We know the man loves football, so accordingly would be kind of surprised if he is not gutting through those issues. Hunter Henry also dealing with a foot issue, and just Austin Hooper in general eating into his targets, but he's been limited in practice, as has Cade Otton on Thursday, which is actually an improvement because he has not been practicing the last few weeks, still dealing with that knee issue. So hopefully Cade is going to be good to go for week 18 and the playoffs. Also note Juwan Johnson dealing with a knee injury. He has been limited all week. Not, convinced that he's going to be sidelined, but hey, Juwan, another one of these guys who has made the most of his, few opportunities over the years, had a really nice week 17 for anyone who was brave enough to start him then. Also note David Njoku ruled out with a knee issue. Again, his season is over, and Tyler Conklin not practicing for the Jets. So maybe get a little bit more of Jeremy Rucker, another proud alum of the Ohio State University. So Dwain, that wraps up the injuries, and now it's time for some bold predictions. Bold prediction season, Dwain. Now, on the season, we've done pretty well. We try to be bold. We accordingly have won 30 times. We have lost 29 times, and we have tied 5 times. So, maybe the judging criteria has been tweaked here and there. But now we've been honest with it. We've been honest with you guys. And now we are honestly trying to crack 500. So, Dwain, no pressure, but also please don't screw this up, man. So, start us off with your first bold prediction.
It's George Pickens. I'm going to say 115 yards, and we'll go with 2 touchdowns, Ian, because I said 1 in the pregame, but I'm going to say 2 because I didn't want to hear you yell at me for telling me that that's not spicy enough. But the basic takeaway here is big game from George Pickens. You are playing against the Bengals. You are going to have to score points. And if we look at the Bengals, man, the secondary has been a problem all year. But over the last 4 games, man, giving up a 3.1 fantasy boost, 2 pass catchers on opposing teams. That's one of the best marks in the NFL. Actually, that is the best mark over the last 4 games. Actually, man, I'm looking at the wrong thing. I'm looking at the running back. So it's been good for running backs. I was like, that's too low. It's 8.8 for pass catchers, an 8.8 fantasy boost to the opposing wide receivers and tight ends. So that's really good for Pickens this week. We know he's obviously balled out. If you look at the 4 games before he got injured, Ian, 3 out of the 4, you were very happy with how Pickens performed. 20.5 fantasy points, 16.9. He had an 8.8 in there in week 12, but 16.4 in week 13. So he was really filling it with Mr. Russell Wilson. I think last week, first game back, only 8 fantasy points, but not on the injury report at all this week. So feeling good about George Pickens against the Bengals.
Always capable of, again, high pointing a ball between a couple of defenders, and also don't underestimate some of the speed he shows, taking some of those slants to the house as well. I'm going to go with Courtland Sutton having a big game, though. Again, trying to stick, for at least in my case, with some offenses that certainly should have everything to play for out there. Sutton here going up against a Chiefs team that accordingly doesn't have anything to play for, so very much hopeful that Bo Nix and company can largely keep on doing what they've been doing all year, and that is field a surprisingly pretty freaking good passing offense. So Sutton, guys, only 17 yards away at this point from 1,000, already has 7 touchdowns. Really was one of the breakout stars, if you can say that, during the second half of the season. So Courtland Sutton, give me 110 yards, and yes, Dwain, staying bold, 2 touchdowns. So give me your second bold call now ahead of week 18.
This one's just going to come down to the last man standing, and that's Michael Carter for the Arizona Cardinals. Nothing to play here for the Cardinals, but Carter's not going to get bench time. Like, they're going to let this guy play. He's shown he's a capable player in the passing game historically. He's also, he's shown us he can be a pretty good running back on the ground as well. So with Carter last week, had a 70% snap share. You're playing against the 49ers, who also don't have much to play for. And it does sound like they're on the verge of shutting multiple players down, a few of them even potentially on the defensive side of the ball. So another thing to keep an eye on. But whenever I look at Michael Carter, I see 100 total yards here, Ian. I think he's going to get to that. Going to score a touchdown as well this weekend.
I'm going to close things out with Mr. Jordan Addison Sunday night against the Lions. Get your popcorn ready for that one. 105 yards and a touchdown against a Lions defense that has been so banged up that I kid you not, guys, since week 10, only the Bears have been worse in more advanced efficiency metrics than not when looking at their pass defense. So, I mean, over these past 3 games, Detroit has allowed 1,089 passing yards. That is 181 more than the next worst defense. So, yes, Justin Jefferson, always a candidate to go off in his own right, but don't forget about Jordan Addison, another guy who's had a fantastic second half of the season. So you guys heard it. George Pickens, Michael Carter, Cortland Sutton, and Jordan Addison. Come on, guys. Just give us at least 2. Stay over 500, and, hopefully we don't have to live with that shame the rest of the offseason otherwise, Dwayne. But we will be back next week regardless. Going to have a bit of a different schedule for the playoffs, but trust us, we will continue to be talking ball all the time here on the Fantasy Life Show. So appreciate you guys tuning in. For Dwayne, for producer Kelsey, for producer Matt, I'm Ian. Thanks again for checking out the Fantasy Life Show. And until next time, take care, everybody.